joining me on my YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment down below. But my guess is you're not watching on YouTube because views have drastically dropped this year. They have. All my sponsors have dropped me as well. All right, so today we're going to talk about psychological disorders. This is a class in college in itself. It's called abnormal psychology, so you kind of go into this thing where you go through pretty much the DSM, so the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual of Psychological Disorders, and you go through it and you check out what's going on with people. Okay, we'll look at this. This is that moment where you self-analyze and self-diagnose, and you shouldn't. Okay. You're not licensed to do it. I'm not licensed to do it. We get to talk about it. All right. So, understanding psychological disorders. So, psychopathology, the scientific study of the origin, symptoms, and development of psychological disorders. So, what is a psychological disorder? It's kind of interesting. It really comes down to a couple factors, but one is pretty important. Does it ruin or mess with your everyday life? Okay? So, a pattern of behavioral and psychological symptoms that causes significant personal distress, impairs the ability to function in one or more important areas of life or both. So, we have the DSM-5. I have this in class. I always tell people if you want to look at it, you can look at it. It's that little purple book down there. But this has every single psychological disorder listed in it. And the criteria that must be met to have those disorders. So, DSM-5, abbreviation for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. The book published by the American Psychiatric Association, so the APA, that describes the specific symptoms and diagnostic guidelines for different psychological disorders. So it's not written by a single person, and it's changed 5 times. Originally you would see things like homosexuality in it. When it was first published, you'd see that in like the 50s. Obviously, we've moved on from that, as a society, and it's different now. So there's certain things in there that you might think that you're going to see, but you're not, because it's not an actual disorder. So, describes more than 300 disorders, has been criticized for including some experiences that are too normal to be considered disorders, such as excessive shyness, using arbitrary cutoffs to draw the line between people with and without particular disorder, gender bias, and then insufficient sensitivity to cultural diversity. And you'll see that in the DSM, specifically prior versions. You can see a host of disorders that were just tailored for women and not men. Okay. So here is an example of what you would see in the DSM-5. So Diagnostic Criteria for Antisocial Personality Disorder. So there is a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others occurring since age 15 years as indicated by 3 or more of the following. So you would have to hit 3 out of these 7, all right, to be considered for this. Or no, 3 out of the 7 to be considered for this, okay? And then moving on, you would see B, C, and D. The individual is at least 18 years. There's evidence of conduct disorder with onset before 15 years old, and the occurrence of antisocial behavior is not exclusively during the course of schizophrenia or a manic episode. So we'll talk about both of those things here in a little bit, but specifically, if you hit 3 of these things, you have a chance to be considered for an antisocial personality disorder. But you still have to get these bottom B, C, and D as well. But look, I mean, deceitfulness is indicated by repeating lying, use of aliases, or conning others for personal profit or pleasure. Impulsivity, failure to plan ahead. Irritability and aggressiveness, as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults. Reckless disregard for safety of self or others. Consistent irresponsibility, as indicated by repeated failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations. Lack of remorse, as indicated by different or being indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another. And then number 1, failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors, as indicated by repeatedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest. I don't know, you look at this and you might, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. Okay, that's one of the things, right? As a 15-year-old, I probably struggled with that a little bit. But I didn't hit these other things necessarily, right? But you get 3 or more, and we're talking about this, okay? All right, understanding psychological disorders. The prevalence of psychological disorders, 50-50 here. So National Comorbidity Survey replication. So what happens here, comorbidity, I hate that word, really just means how many of these disorders you might have. So it could be like diseases upon diseases or disorders upon disorders. So National Comorbidity Survey replication. So asked over 9,000 Americans if they had experienced specific symptoms of psychological disorders, A, during the previous 12 months, and B, at any point in their lives. The results suggested that 1 out of 4 respondents, 26%, reported experiencing the symptoms of a psychological disorder during the previous year. 25%, right, a quarter, 26%, say that during the previous year they have experienced something, okay? A psychological disorder of something. So they reveal high degree of comorbidity, which means that people diagnosed with one disorder are also frequently diagnosed with another disorder as well. Then, well, here we go.
When was that study taken?
Does that?
Because if it happened like during or...
Not during this time.
Or, no, during a war?
No.
Or just afterwards, then of course it would be like way higher.
This would be like 2011. So some key diagnostic categories in the DSM. This is the DSM-4. Whenever we, our books edition, DSM-5 wasn't out yet. But you can see infancy, childhood, or adolescent disorders, substance-related disorders, somatoform disorders. So if you don't know what that is, persistent recurring complaints of bodily or somatic symptoms that have no physical or medical basis. So you manifest this bodily change. Okay, it could be hives. Okay, stress could bring hives or whatever it is, so stress-related something disorder, and then boom, you have hives. That would be somatoform. It would manifest physically, but they wouldn't necessarily know exactly where it was coming from. Okay? Sexual and gender identity disorders, that's still in there. Sleep disorders, huge in the DSM. And then impulse control disorders, so the inability to resist an impulse, urge, or temptation to perform an act that is harmful to the self or others. A lot of times you would see, like OCD is something we'll talk about in this chapter. Obsessive compulsive disorder. So you obsess, which would be the thought, right? And then you have a compulsion, which would be the behavior. So you obsess about something, germs, and then the behavior would be washing hands. And you wash your hands until they bleed to get the germs off. That is real. Okay? So you impulse control disorders would be, well, I don't know if I was that right. Hold on. Well, I just explained OCD, but I guess they're basically saying kleptomania, which is stealing, and pyromania, which is lighting fires. But we'll look at it here in a little bit. All right, anxiety disorders. So a list of anxiety disorders in the top right. Phobias, panic disorder, agoraphobia, which is the fear of having a panic attack in public. Selective mutism, separation anxiety disorder, GAD, which is generalized anxiety disorder, unspecified anxiety disorder, and then moving down, social anxiety disorder, and then substance medication-induced anxiety disorder, which happens often. So anxiety, an unpleasant emotional state characterized by physical arousal and feelings of tension, apprehension, and worry. So we'll go through a bunch of these. This category of psychological disorders, extreme anxiety is the main diagnostic feature and causes significant disruptions in the person's cognitive, behavioral, or interpersonal functioning. Again, disorders, I can't say this enough, if it doesn't ruin your everyday life, it's not a disorder. Okay? So, 3 features distinguish normal anxiety from pathological anxiety. So, irrational. The anxiety is provoked by perceived threats that are exaggerated or non-existent. And the anxiety response is out of proportion to the actual importance of the situation. Uncontrollable. A person can't shut off the alarm reaction even when he or she knows it is unrealistic. And then disruptive. It interferes with relationships, job, academic performance, and everyday activities. So let's look at a couple of these sudden episodes of extreme anxiety. So we have generalized anxiety disorder, GAD. This is pretty prevalent. So an anxiety disorder characterized by excessive global and persistent symptoms of anxiety, also called free-floating anxiety, because it just goes from one thing to another. Okay? People with this disorder are constantly tense and anxious, and their anxiety is pervasive. When one source of worry is removed, another quickly moves to take its place. The anxiety can be attached to virtually any object or to none at all. Then we have panic disorder, an anxiety disorder in which the person experiences frequent and unexpected panic attacks. Panic attack, you probably heard, maybe even seen one before. Maybe even experienced one before. So a sudden episode of extreme anxiety that rapidly escalates in intensity. I haven't ever really... I have felt extreme anxiety before, and the world feels quick. Feels like I can't catch up to my environment. You know what I mean? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I don't have trouble breathing. I've never had that. I've never gone that far with it. Now, I have been around people who have a panic attack, and it's so hard for them to catch their breath. It's like uncontrollable tears, breath catching. It just can't happen. And it looks like they're hyperventilating. Okay? And me and the personality that I have, I'm like, oh, is there anything I can do for you? And it's like, it's almost nothing you can do except for like, just be right there, you know? But, yeah, I don't know. I've never felt that before. Like I said, I've felt high levels of anxiety where I feel like the environment is increasing, like the speed of the environment is increasing and I can't do anything about it. But I've never had necessarily a panic attack. And then we have agoraphobia, so an anxiety disorder involving the extreme and irrational fear of experiencing a panic attack in a public situation and being unable to escape or get help. Has anybody ever seen Benchwarmers? The movie. Good talk. So sad. Well, if you have seen it, you know that there's a character, one of the brother of David Spade, and he has agoraphobia. He will not leave. He has to go get Girl Scout cookies from the front door, and he freaks out. I don't know. It's an interesting. I think that link right there would show you that clip that I'm talking about. So check it out on your own time if you want. Explaining panic disorder. So triple vulnerability model of panic. So it states that the biological predisposition toward anxiety, meaning that you have inherited this somehow, a low sense of control over potential life-threatening events. So you have this external locus of control. You don't think you have control over your situation, your environment. And then, an oversensitivity to physical sensations combined to make a person vulnerable to panic. Then we have catastrophic cognition theory. So people with panic disorder are not only oversensitive to physical sensations, they also tend to catastrophize the meaning of their experience. So, almost seeing the worst situation possible in every single situation, which I kind of do that. I don't know why, but I do. Then we have phobias, a persistent and irrational fear of specific object, situation, or activity. Specific phobia is an excessive, intense, and irrational fear of a specific object, situation, or activity that is actively avoided or endured with marked anxiety. We have a list of them up here on the right. It goes all the way from fear of dust, wind, books, red objects, marriage, growing excessive amounts of body hair. It's so crazy. Fear of the number 13. I don't necessarily, in my life, I never thought that I had one until that stupid whole one came up. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Trypophobia or whatever?
Yeah, it's like, yes, I don't know what it is, but it starts with a T. Those images of those pods, those flowers with those like pods and there's something inside of them, I'm talking about them right now. And my hair on the top of my head is tingling. I never thought I had a phobia until I started teaching psychology. And it was like, then somebody was like, hey, look at this picture. And I was like, oh my God. It was crazy. So 13% of people experience a specific phobia throughout their lifetime. They tend to fall into 4 categories. So fear of particular situations, such as flying, driving, tunnels, bridges, elevators, crowds, enclosed places. I think it's so funny when people who are scared of bridges have to drive over bridges.
That's not funny at all.
Like when I'm not like laughing out loud, but like when we're in the car and they're like, "Oh my God, we're in Charleston and there's a giant bridge," and they're like, "We gotta drive over this bridge." I'm like, "Yeah, we do." And in my mind, I'm like, "We're gonna make it," and they just don't understand that we're not. That they think that we're not gonna make it. It's interesting to me.
Well, I'm afraid that
Bridges?
At all?
Zero.
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 That's
I mean, what is it? The Mothman prophecies? You guys know what I'm talking about there? The West Virginia bridge collapse? Don't watch that movie, bridge people. Then we have fear of features of the natural environment: heights, water, thunderstorms, lightning. I coached this kid, probably in the mid-2000, the aughts, so like 2006 probably, and he was a stud. He wanted to go pitch D1 baseball at Campbell University, but I had to take him off the mound every single time that there was thunder or lightning in the distance. In the distance. He's like, he'd look in the dugout and be like, "Coach, take me out." I'm like, "All right, here we go. We got to make this change." It's weird. Fear of injury or blood, injections, needles, medical or dental procedures. Having kids, I completely understand this now. What a crazy, traumatic experience that is when you're not told that you're going to get shots, and then all of a sudden you go in, and then somebody is, 4 shots at a time sometimes, 5 shots at a time when you're early on, like 4 years old, and your parents are holding you down on the table to get this done. It's an intense situation, and I can completely understand that this right here can happen to somebody pretty quickly. Fear of animals and insects: snakes, spiders, dogs, cats, slugs, bats. Slugs? What? What are we going to do? What's a slug going to do? Social phobia or social anxiety disorder. This is probably a little bit more prevalent now than I've ever seen it, but an anxiety disorder involving the extreme and irrational fear of being embarrassed, judged, or scrutinized by others in social situations. And I'm not talking about getting up in front of somebody and having your voice be a little, shaky, or you be a little shaky. I remember giving presentations in high school, and literally my body was shaking. I remember that. And this is not that. This is a little bit different. This is like to the point where you might not go outside. You might not put yourself in a social situation ever. Explaining phobias, basic learning principles such as classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning. And then, for some of these, you can, snakes, spiders, heights, all that kind of stuff. This is, again, handed down to us. Biological predispositions to be scared of certain things that kill humans. Post-traumatic stress disorder. When you see this, I know you think about veterans, but it's a little bit more than that. So an anxiety disorder in which chronic and persistent symptoms of anxiety develop in response to an extreme physical or psychological trauma. Now, could this be war-related? Yes. Could it be a car wreck? Yes. Could it be a divorce? Yes. Could it be anything? Anything could cause this. Any trauma. So, military veterans suffer. This is widely accepted for people who survive other traumas like natural disasters, physical or sexual assault, random acts of violence, terrorist attacks. 3 core symptoms occur: frequently recalling the event, and then avoiding stimuli or situations that trigger memories and experiences related to the event, and undergoes a number of emotional responses, and then increased physical arousal associated with anxiety. OCD, so we were talking about this a little bit before. An anxiety disorder in which the symptoms of anxiety are triggered by intrusive, repetitive thoughts and urges to perform certain actions. So obsessions are repeated, intrusive, and uncontrollable irrational thoughts or mental images that cause extreme anxiety and distress. When you see obsessions, all you have to do is think about, okay, how am I thinking? Thoughts. And then compulsions, that's the behavior. Repetitive behavior or mental acts that are performed to prevent or reduce anxiety. I usually show a documentary at this moment where this girl named Trisha, maybe, I can't remember if she pronounced it Trisha or Trisha, but Trisha is scared of getting AIDS. So when she goes out, but she works for a mortician. So she thinks she's going to get AIDS. So she washes her clothes 50 times in a row.